Okay, I'm set up here to talk about Anatolian histories and go through this article that kind of brushes on it as it goes through time here. And in the process of reading through it, I felt like it's leaving something out. It's kind of doing that thing where they say, well, you've heard of this. Okay, well, we're going to go from that and go on. But there was before this. And they don't really go into it much. And I'll go into this that I'm about to go into slightly. And whenever I say and things, you'll know what I'm talking about for having watched this video. And I can guess that I'm going to put this one out first and then put the other one out directly after it, and hope y'all are into watching a dual set of videos. Although they're not completely attached to each other, they quite well are, for you need to know one to know the other of what I'm going to go into. But what this is the Anatolian histories, merging empires and lands, changing hands. And this is about Anatolia and the part of the puzzle that's quite often left out. It doesn't get discussed. Even in our own talkings that we've done here, we quite often focus on what happened in Egypt and what happened in Sumeria and the Greeks and the Caucasus Mountains, which are just right over here. But we don't talk about this place very much. But since we've been talking about Göbekli Tepe and all of those places recently, Karahan and so on, and then we've talked about Catalhoyuk, that's right up from here. And if you just go north, it's going to hit the Black Sea region and so on else. If you just go left, you'll hit the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean. But as you come south, you can curl around that Anatolian peninsula and curl around into what we called Canaanite lands, although this one area is always designated as Phoenician lands because it had Sidon and Baalbek and all that in it, and it's just supposed to be hugging the coast. And then that fades, and there's Palestine down there at the bottom in a little spot, and this unknown thing that goes on. And these people have claimed this Jerusalem and this Judea and things like that out of it. But we've got to go back before that time to understand what we're looking at when we're looking at it. And that's what I've tried to dig into with my studies is, okay, like the little kid that kept asking why. When we go back in time, I kept asking, well, what was before that? And were there any people here? And well, where were they? Because they were somewhere. And try to put it all together. And as I said, until they had modern genetics, really we were looking at pottery. And there was people fighting with each other on the fact of whether or not you had trade with those people or you were the same people. Things of that nature. But certain finds that we have found in the last 25 years have totally clarified the situation, from the finding of the ancient city of Troy itself, exposing Hattusha, the Hittites, and their great kingdom that had gone long ago. And again, they're the missing piece of this puzzle. But before you called them the Hittites even, there was a people called the Hatti. And everybody tries to relate those two, but it's not necessarily the same thing at all. And the Hatti, and what did they have going on? For that's just a region. really, but you think of Anatolia as a region, and things came out of, we'll just try to go into it here. Things came out of Anatolia. Quite a few things came from Anatolia, and what people don't realize is that that was the circuit hub that everything had to go through, that was going north from the south of the Levant and Egypt, but it was also catching it all the way coming up the Euphrates of Sumeria, running right into the same area. And so it was a definite hub situation. And these people were known to have been rich, and we'll go into King Midas and things like that, probably in the second part, and its accompaniment. But Anatolia, there's a lot of things, like I said, comes from Anatolia. But you think of Anatolia, it's this peninsula that sticks out there, but peninsula actually has a phallic connotation to its words. Think of Florida. And other ideas come like atoll, which is part of Anatolia. It's almost an island, but not. It's stuck out there. It's a bulge out onto the ocean, if you will. And there were a people here that we know of as the Phoenicians that called themselves Canaan, from the old biblical times and running back before that for at least 1,000, 1,500 years. But then what was going on before that? Was there anybody here? Well, yeah, the first people we find that are leaving traces of themselves in this area, again, perhaps even other than small glimpses here and there, of the idea of coming out of Africa some 50 to 70,000 years ago, and magically morphing into Cro-Magnon man, whose genetics still show up, so that shows you that's all busted, the idea. But these people that came down and left a trace are apparently being called Natufians because of some sites that are found that are early, going back many thousands BC, in this area. And they found last year blonde-haired, blue-eyed genetics dating back to 6900 BC. And I did a video on that, and that verifies them having swamped into this area. But they had been there before that. They just didn't leave a trace, and we haven't found that spot. Much like Göbekli Tepe, where you never knew it existed, and then pow, here's something that more than doubles the dates of Sumeria and other places, and looks like it's pretty hot. It's not a city as well as like we're looking at here now, but in that aspect, it's got a whole lot going on to it, and an astrology hub and all kinds of things, which shows you as it's been an extreme verifier. But let's go back to this Anatolia and what comes from that, because where it gets its name, and it still retains that to this day, is Anat. And so we can look back maybe at these Natufians and have some projection onto ideals that go on. And then the next thing we're going to get that we can really look at is going to be a variation of the first religion that was there and cultures that was going on, right? That's what archaeology, So I think one of the best places, if we're going to start discussing Anatolia, is Anat, because it was named after Anat. Now, who is Anat? Well, let's go to Anat, and then I'll start going off like I do. Here's Anat. And you can pronounce it Anat and Anat, Anatu. Classically, it's Anath, where the T has the TH sound with it. We've talked about it a bunch of times. In Hebrew, it's even Anath. Phoenician, it's Anat. Greek, Anath. In Egyptian, which they have it also, Anat, Anat, Anti, or Anant. It's a major southwest Semitic goddess. Her attributes vary widely among different cultures and over time, and even within particular myths, they tell you. So she carries quite some area. In fact, if we just look at the picture here over here, it's done to the right. Let's blow that up. What we're looking here is the Atep crown on Anat, who is from this Canaanite land, definitely. Canaanite goddess, says at the bottom left-hand corner, Anat. She's supposed to be holding a spear, but that's always a separate entity and never seemed to be gotten out of it. Perhaps somebody, whittles a whole toothpick, puts a little spear tip on it, that wood rotted away. A lot of these statues are cast and cut, or even soapstone, and then rubbed over with gold foil. Look at that headdress. Does that look familiar? That's the Osiris Atef crown, where it shows you from the earliest of dynasties this singular crown instead of the dual crown, and his secondary attribute are the ostrich feather plumes that go up in there. And this dates way, way, way back. This wasn't some late adopted version of it after the Amarna period or blah, blah, blah. No. This goes way back. This is Anat. And Ugarit's real important. If you look, they have her name in hieroglyph over here. Let's try to just go down here. They have a hieroglyph. Her symbol's the Atef crown, and that's Osiris's crown. The region that she's usually with is Canaan and the Levant. Her parents are El and Asherah. I want you to remember that as we speak about this. Her consort was actually Baal Hadad. And then in Elephantine Yahwism, it was Yahweh of the Bible. And in the ancient Egyptian religion, it is Set or Seth. And I've done a video about Seth Peribsen and his origins right there at the earliest of dynasties, and where they get that from, ancestor veneration and pulling it off later. But Seth is also Adam and Eve's third kid. Cain slew Abel and went away, and then she had gotten Seth from the Lord, and in a way that was to replace Abel. So there really was three, but one of them, boom. I'm not going to really go into that right now, but I hit religion right there, or it did automatically off of it. And I've done a few videos about that. If y'all have been with me for a while, you're probably hip to where I'm going with some of this, but I'm going to have to touch on it all the way through it. So, Ugarit's kind of important to this and finding out about ancient religions and where they come from and stuff, because it showed us something weird. A place called Ras Shamra. It's a tell that they had in ancient, in Syria, what we call Syria today. And inside there were a whole bunch of tablets and cuneiform and stuff. And they had a Rosetta Stone situation already at hand, so they were able to easily start deciphering this. And whenever they did, strangely, it was telling you about this whole situation, and it sounded like crap that came right out of the Bible, but it's giving an idea of this person named El. And instead of him fighting Leviathan, he's fighting a sea god known as Yam, and in the Bible, Yam is the sea. In fact, it says in the Bible, Yam Suf, that's the supposedly what everybody thinks of as the Red Sea, but it actually says Sea of Reeds. Suf is reeds that they use to make biblos out of, papyrus. And therefore, the idea that we have with this big parting of the waters thing wasn't the way that it went down at all. And it has to go with the Hyksos and everything else, but let's get back into here, correctly here. In Ugaritic text, Anat is depicted as violent or war, delighting in war, but is also the establisher of peace. She is depicted as sexual and fertile, bringing forth offspring, while still continuing to be called a virgin and a maiden. What ding? I need to get one of those bells. In the Baal cycle text, Anat appears to be a war goddess, initially called on by her father El to set the stage for the coronation of Yam. This is the sea god. Anat, however, agitates for her younger brother and possibly lover, Baal. Now we know in the Bible, Baal worship and Baal bad and all these things that go on. But I'm telling you, that's actually the same thing. And even though they tried to play it off by writing into the Bible, this whole thing about Baal is this, and yet, whenever they're doing that, what are they worshiping? They're worshiping El. Yeah, it goes back and forth, and they're flopping between these. It's the old Canaanite religion. Yeah, and so which one has the power to do this? Which one has the power to do that? Well, what's an odd situation is in that story right there, going to call down lightning, and they can't seem to do it. He pours water all over the thing, which is probably kerosene anyhow, and lights the thing on fire. God made it go whoosh. But so then he kills all the priests of Baal, and ta-da, they walk into place. But there are priests of Asherah at that same meeting, and they just don't get mentioned or killed at all, do they? No, they don't. So are they worshiping Asherah? Because God Almighty, the name God Almighty, El Shaddai, is actually the goddess Asherah. Yeah, it's just another name for that one time they had the whole thing going on. And it's weird, it's called a Baal cycle, and so it's just like in Egypt where they go through this cycle of every day and somebody kills you off and it all ends up da-da-da. And it has to do with the sea, but it's also the sea of stars that we talked about long ago, that one guy got into that long argument with me about. And people freak out when they hear things like possibly her brother was possibly her lover and da-da-da. Well, they say they have offspring here. And everybody freaks out and, oh, that's incest, and it tries to, no, that's the modern thinking on it too. You have to really think of it in a way that, okay, we're going to make up a game like D&D, and they start off with some gods, okay, and here they are, okay, and it looks like we've already got a man and a woman and his kids, right? So how does anything happen from that? They must be inbreeding. Oh, well, the Bible, okay, Adam and Eve had two kids, Cain and Abel. Cain slew Abel. How did the third kid come along? Well, okay, well, Adam did, but then, okay, well, Cain went to some other way, the land of Nod, and took a wife. Where do you get a wife from if there's not any other people? I don't have to go there too far for it all just falls apart on that ideal. But eventually you get to the point where the only way to make more people that are of this area over here is if somebody has sex with his mother, or women weren't mentioned, and so that would have been his sister too. For just like the gods, if there's only this small group of them and you want to say there's some other aspect, where does it come from? So that's where they get the idea. Yeah, sure, the Egyptians may have took this a little too far, and perhaps some royal families took it a little too far, but in doing so, they ensured they were keeping it in the group. And Not that I'm condoning it in any sort of situation, I'm trying to explain it. The text fragments describe her appearance in battle. In a fragmentary passage from Ugarit, modern Ras Shamra, I talked about in Syria, Anat appears as a fierce, wild, and furious warrior in battle, wading knee-deep in blood, striking off heads, cutting off hands, binding the heads to her torso and the hands in her sash, driving out the old men and townsfolk with her arrows as her heart filled with joy. And I'm telling you that this is Diana, the 100, Anana, every single one of those goddesses in the same way as a goddess of love and this, that, and the other, and all of a sudden you done pissed her off. And she turns into a goddess of war. And this can only hearken to people like Amazons. For they had this women warrior type situation, right? Well, a lot of people had a little more women warrior than people want to give credit for, and women who might stand up for themselves, and they might go down dying swinging rather than end up being raped and taken, and things like that happen to them. For after watching everything go down in front of them, they don't want to be a part of that people. The cutting off of hands too, and then keeping them in a sack. That's seen all the way through the time of Egypt, whenever they had a bounty out on the head for Nubians, where if you killed a Nubian, you just cut off his right hand and you put it in a sack and you would get credit for it. And they used to do this in battle and stuff, and it was really like a trophy, not necessarily the heads, but they would do it in a certain person they would keep their head of. Like if he killed the king, they'd take it, and his sword or something like that and all this, right? To denote that, hey, here's the trophy. But the hands was a way of saying how many people did you kill in battle and things like this. Her character in this passage anticipates her subsequent warlike role against the enemies of Baal. She is later described ritually reenacting battle and then purifying herself in her temple, where she receives a message from Baal asking her to establish peace on terms favorable to him. There's a few key words here. She is initially concerned that the new enemies of him have arisen, and notes that she put an end to Yam, the beloved of El, and two other enemies of Baal, including a seven-headed serpent. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Arsh, the darling of the gods, Atik, who is quarrelsome, the calf of El, Ishtat, which is dawn or the fire, the bitch of the gods, and Zabib. So if you get Baal Zabib, you get Beelzebub. And the daughter of El. Now, let me cut in here real quick. If you don't think the Bible has anything to do with this, then try to think of things in a little different light and flavor. Think of it like the Bible. Yeah. Think about the Temp El, the Chap El, the people that were named Ange El. And in all these cases, they just try to say, well, El means God. Well, if you're in a land that people have a God named El, then if you're using that, then that's that God. Or what? Come on. For years, I haven't had anybody put a decent one to me after I put that to them, including preachers. Well, El just means God. It just means God to these people. God and his wife and his whole thing or whatever. But no, they don't have that in the Bible. Yeah, they do. They're going to tell you here in a minute. Angel, Michael, which is Michael, Ariel, Gabriel, Nathaniel, Daniel. did a video where this lady is a Yale scholar, talks about how all of them have this El epitaph till a Sinai and Ezekiel situation and stuff, and then they start to have Yah, like Elijah. People don't get it, but Elijah actually means El is Yah. And the goddess form we know of as the prophetess Bealiah means Baal is Yahweh. What? Yeah. Let's see. Anat goes to Baal and washes herself ritually and makes herself beautiful before a feast with him. Text fragments then describe Baal and Anat grasping each other's genitals, aroused, and later Anat giving birth to her younger brother's child, though Anat continues to be referred to as a maiden and a virgin after this. Magically brand new. Another title used repeatedly for Anat's sister-in-law of the peoples, or progenitress of the peoples, or sister-in-law, or widow of the Lamites. But, well, I could go off on that, but, so, a perpetual virgin, Mary type situation, right? You can get that flavor. I'm sure you can get that flavor. So when Baal complains he has no royal house, Anat vows to intercede with her father El and threatens to bloody him if he does not grant Baal a house. She also asks Anthrat to intercede with El, after which she grants Baal a house. Anat and Baal rejoice and hold a celebratory feast, but Mot, who is death, is angered at not being invited and threatens Baal. Now this is echoed in Greek tales. For this is a tale, this is the first of people, for this hooks up as the Titans. Yep, well, how do I get that? Well, El is Chronos. The Greeks tell you straight out. El is Chronos, and so he was the Titan before. In fact, just a little flavor of this. How far am I getting? 27 minutes, okay. El was Chronos, was Saturn, okay, worshipped as a star by these boat Phoenicians like crazy. They know the stars, they know what's going on, they know the world's round, they know where be dragons. And El has a son named Ugarit. You don't hear about him. But in a time of strife, supposedly after a flood perhaps, there's a few versions of this. He has to sacrifice his own son, his only begotten son, and St. Chuathon and a few other Greek philosophers tell you that the Phoenician people and Carthage people to this day, whenever he was alive, still use this name for an only son. If he's your only son, you know, kind of like you in Spanish, everybody's named Maria or Mary, even males, Jose Maria Alazabal, Maria, it gets named onto him. This holy name, which equals the same type of thing. Mary means water, like maritime. But El of the Bible and the Temple and the Chapel is Chronos, and after sacrificing his son Ugarit, they named the land after him, which is south of where they are, and are in the south, inland from where they are, and they named it Ugarit. And at one time it was decent land. And you know of this as Judea, but there was no J until the year 1300s, and it was named after him, Judea, and that's where we get it from. And the northern part was the 10 tribes, and we've done a few videos about that, but I'm about to hit it all again because I'm saying all these things and have some newer people, and of course rolling back through it with more information. For now that you're somewhat geared up for it, you could understand it, and it won't seem so striking. But he also, for his daughter, named this peninsula that we talk about Anatolia, Anat. And it's also where we get the name Anita. And it's also where we get the name Anna, which also comes from Inanna. And it all goes together. And they do the same thing. Isn't that crazy? And now Baal Hadad is Saturn. Zeus. Baal has a lightning bolt. Now there's some conflagration and twisting going on with the way people made their pantheon out of things. It's the same thing. Anat and Baal rejoice and hold that celebratory feast, but Mot threatens Baal. And after Baal descends into the underworld, El and Anat mourn his death, and Anat searches for the world and the underworld for him, her concern described in maternal terms. Like a cow searching for its calf, Anat finds Baal's body and carries it to the god's sacred mountain Zaphon, where she performs funeral rites and ritual sacrifices of animals, after which Baal is revived. He's resurrected. Anat then finds Mot, seizes him and splits him with a sword or a knife, winnows him and burns him, then grinds him with millstones and sifts him through a sieve-like grain, and sows his remains of ashes into the sea, or gives it to the birds. Nonetheless, Mot returns and struggles further with Baal before finally acknowledging his kingship. For people said that because the birds ate some of it and took it to heaven, he got reborn from it. But he also is like, you can't kill a god, he just comes back. Well, he's in this story tonight. Well, tomorrow's a new day and he's back again, for it's going to turn dark tonight, and that is darkness. And so it's the cycle, and it's all about that and the stars and things that go around it. Sure, as above, so below. Explicitly. So nonetheless, Mot returns and struggles further with him after being ground up and turned into that, with Baal, before finally acknowledging Baal's kingship. CTA 10 tells of Anat seeking out Baal while he is out hunting. She finds him and is told she will bear a steer to him. Following the birth, she brings the new calf to Baal, which this is calf worship and bull worship, and this bull god of the Bible is bull, and Aleph is a bull-headed symbol. Nowhere in this text is Anat explicitly Baal Hadad's consort. She is not Baal's wife, but is the power behind the throne. To judge from later traditions, and Thart, who also appears in these texts, is more likely to be Baal Hadad's consort. However, complicating matters, it is not that Northwest Semitic culture permitted more than one wife, and non-monogamy is normal for deities in many pantheons. And if you just want an experience of that, look at all the stuff that Zeus spawns forth. And this is just another one of those situations. No different. In the North Canaanite stories of Akkad, Anat covets a special bow and set of arrows, which are given to Akkad, the son of the judge Daniel. What? Stay with me. Dan, the Danites. These were created for Anat by the craftsman god Kothar Wa Kausis. Who's that? That's a god of the Hittites. Means skillful and wise, and that they were the dwarven gods that built all these special things. It equates to it in the places. But given to Daniel to give to his infant son, where Akkad grows to be a young man, the goddess Anat tries to buy the boat for him, offering him gold and silver and even immortality. But Akkad refuses all offers, saying that he accepts that it is the lot of humans to be mortal. He also insults Anat, saying that bows and arrows are tools for men. and not women, asking what would a woman do with a bow, angering the huntress goddess even more. So this saying that he accepts the lot of humans and this opportunity, this seems like it's a version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, except for he's offered it and he denies it. Their offerings, Jesus was offered by the devil supposedly, and all these things. Here we get into Sumerian connections. Like Inanna in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Anat complains to El and threatens to harm El if he does not let her take vengeance on Aquat. El concedes. Anat arranges for her attendant Yatpan in the form of a hawk or a vulture to attack Aquat. However, instead of merely knocking the breath out of him and stealing the bow, Yatpan kills Aquat. Yatpan then runs away, and the bow and arrows fall into the sea. Oops. Aquat's death makes the land infertile. Aha. Due to drought for a time, and his wise younger sister Paquat sets out to avenge him by killing the vulture that killed him. And this is reflected a bunch of times. You're probably thinking of a few. Anat regrets her decision and mourns for Aquat and the loss of the bow, but the ending of the story is missing. It breaks off at an extremely dramatic moment when Paquat discovers that the mercenary whom she has hired to help her avenge the death is in fact Yatpan, her brother's murderer. The story parallels that of Anat and her revenge on Mot for the killing of her brother. So it's the same thing over and over again, basically. Gibson in 78 rethinks Rameh, the merciful, co-wife of El with Anthrat, is also the goddess Anat, but he fails to take into account the primary source documents. Use of dual names of deities in Ugaritic poetry are an essential part of the verse form, and that two names for the same deity are traditionally mentioned in parallel lines in the same way. Anthrat is called Elath, meaning the goddess, in paired couplets. The poetic structure can also be seen in early Hebrew verse forms. Shading. But what they're saying is here, the goddess of this, the goddess of that. So she gets both those names. They just repeat it. They'll say something that she did this, and then they'll say the goddess of this did this. And you go, oh, she's the goddess of this. It's a form of logic, where you go A and B, and then C does this, so C is A. She is this, right? In Egypt, Anat is sporadically attested in Egypt since the 18th century, and so that's way back in the dynasties, and is found in the name of Anat Her and fragmentally attested figure, possibly a Hyksos ruler, but then they give dates of as early as the 12th dynasty, and that's not Hyksos, for they were there in the 15th till the 16th and out. 12th, 15th, and 16th dynasty, whose name means Anat, is content and is taken to indicate Canaanite descent. As a warrior goddess, Anat is one of several Syrian northwest Semitic deities who was prominently worshipped by the warrior pharaohs of the 16th dynasty. She was often paired with the goddess Ashtart and Ashtara in the contest between Horus and Set. What? Yeah, she's there. In those deals and on the wall and stuff, that's her. She's the other one. A lot of times you're thinking that's Isis. They're saying this is who it is. It's not Isis. What crown is she wearing? These two goddesses appear as the daughters of Ra, or Ra, and are given as the allies to the god Set, who had been identified with the Semitic god Hadad. Saturn, Baal Hadad, his father's Chronus. During the Hyksos period, Anat had temples in the Hyksos capital of Avaris and Beth Shan, Israel, as well, being worshipped in Memphis, and inscriptions from Memphis in the 15th and 12th centuries BC. Anat is called Ben Ptah, meaning daughter of Ptah. She is associated with Reshbu, the Canaanite Reshep, and in some texts sometimes identified with the native Egyptian goddess Neith, who is hooked up with Athena, and both the Greek philosophers and the priests of Egypt agreed that Neith and Athena were the same founding goddess that founded both places. What does it say here about it? Neith was an early ancient Egyptian deity who was said to be the first and prime creator. She was said to be the creator of the universe and all it contains, and she governs and how it functions. She was the goddess of wisdom, weaving the cosmos. Yep. Mother of rivers, water, childbirth, hunting, war, and fate. Warlike goddess. Athena, Neith. She is sometimes called Queen of Heaven. What ding! Her iconography varies. She's usually shown carrying one or more weapons. During the 19th dynasty in the New Kingdom era, Seti I's favorite chariot team was named Anat is Content. Seti, show a picture of him here, and just a wall. Ramses II made an Anat his personal guardian in battle and enlarged her temple in Pi Ramses itself. It is also named his daughter, who he later married, Ben Anat, daughter of Anat. What? Yeah, no, so if they hate these Hyksos so much, what's... hello? Hold on, ding! Ramses II furthermore named his sword Anat is Victorious, and his dog was named Anat Protects. The dog appears in a carving in Bet El Wali temple, and named one of his horses Anat is Content. Where do those horses come from? Well, they came from the Hyksos. They didn't like the Hyksos. Well, they liked all this other stuff. They liked those bows and chariots and horses and all the other stuff. In fact, they adopted in their gods, and everybody goes, oh, they all adopted this. Here's one definitely seen goes the other way. In Akkadian, the form would expect Anat would take was Antu, literally Antum. This would also be the normal feminine form, what would be taken of Anu. And Anu is the major sky god or origin god of the Sumerians. The Akkadian form of An, sky, is the Sumerian god of heaven. Antu appears in Akkadian texts mostly as rather colorless consort of Anu, the mother of Ishtar in the Gilgamesh story, but in the earlier tellings of Ishtar, this is Inanna. Inanna is Ishtar. But is also identified with the northwest Semitic goddess Anat, of essentially the same name. It is unknown whether this is an equation of two originally separate goddesses or whose names happen to fall together, or whether Anat's cult spread to Mesopotamia or it went the other way, where she came to be worshipped as Anu's spouse, because the Mesopotamian form of her name suggested she was a counterpart of Anu. It's also been suggested that the parallelism between the names of the Sumerian goddess Inanna and her West Semitic counterpart Ishtar continued in Canaanite tradition as Anat, or Anath, and as Astarte, particularly in the poetry of the Ugarit. Anat also shared warlike persona with the Mesopotamian goddess Anunatu, who was sometimes treated as an aspect of Ishtar and an alias of Antu. Additionally, the name of Antu was related to or viewed as an epithet of Inanna, Ishtar, and adding to it there may be a possible syncretism between Antu and Ishtara Ninsayana, and there is. Anat and Astarte were invariably linked in Ugaritic scripture, also known to have formed a triad known from sculpture, with a third goddess who was given the name title Kadesh, meaning the Holy One. What ding! And man, we're going to have to go to part 2 on this. There's not much more. It'll be in your top left-hand corner coming up. And we'll go to part 2. For all we've got left is what about said about Israel, and then